Welcome to one of the greatest chess games played by Tal, one of the deadliest monsters of the chess world. Grab your popcorn for the game. Tal begins the game by moving the pawn in front of his king to e4, immediately claiming space and opening lines for attack. Alexander Koblenz replies by moving the pawn in front of his queen's bishop, choosing a Sicilian defense, a fighting opening. Tal develops the knight near his king toward the center. Koblenz pushes the pawn in front of his queen, one square forward, strengthening the center. Tal pushes the pawn in front of his queen, two squares forward, directly challenging the center. Koblenz captures that pawn with a pawn, opening the position. Tal recaptures that pawn using his knight, bringing a piece into the center. Koblenz develops the knight near his king, attacking the central pawn. Tal develops his other knight toward the center, defending the pawn. Koblenz develops his second knight, matching development. Tal brings his bishop out aggressively on g5, preparing to pin the knight. Koblenz responds by pushing the pawn in front of his king, preparing to develop. Tal brings his queen toward the center, connecting his pieces and hinting at castling long. Koblenz develops his bishop, preparing to castle. Tal castles long, placing his king on the queen side and his rook on the d-file. Koblenz castles short, putting the kings on opposite sides. This means both sides will attack. Tal retreats his knight to a safer square, preparing a pawn storm. Koblenz brings his queen out early, eyeing pressure on the queen side. Tal supports the center by pushing the pawn on f2 one square forward. Koblenz pushes a pawn on the queen side, beginning counterplay against Tal's king. Tal launches his attack by pushing the pawn to g4, creating an attack. This pawn move is a declaration of war. Koblenz moves a rook to the center, preparing defense. Tal plays his bishop to e3, gaining tempo on the black queen. Koblenz retreats his queen to a safer square. Tal pushes the pawn in front of his rook on the king side again, threatening to rip open the king. Koblenz responds by pushing another pawn on the queen side, racing for counterplay. Tal pushes his g-pawn forward aggressively, attacking the knight and opening lines. Koblenz retreats the knight, choosing defense. Tal pushes the g-pawn again, sacrificing it to tear open the king's shelter. Koblenz captures that pawn with a pawn. Tal immediately pushes the pawn in front of his rook, opening even more lines. Koblenz captures that pawn with another pawn. But now the king's position is completely exposed. Tal recaptures the pawn from his rook, placing it on an open file. Koblenz develops a knight to block the attack. Tal retreats the rook calmly, keeping pressure. Koblenz strikes in the center with a pawn push. Tal responds by pushing the pawn in front of his king, locking the center and keeping the attack alive. Koblenz captures the pawn in the center. Tal develops his bishop, which turned out to be a slight mistake. Koblenz blocks with a bishop. Tal brings his queen toward the enemy king, setting up a direct mating threat. Koblenz moves his king to escape checks. Tal gives check by moving the queen directly next to the king. Koblenz blocks by retreating a knight, a mistake born from fear. Tal lifts his rook up the board, preparing a deadly rook swing. Koblenz pushes a pawn to create escape squares. Tal plays a stunning bishop move, targeting the weakest pawn near the king. Koblenz defends by moving a rook. Tal sacrifices his bishop on the queen side to bring his other rook into the attack faster. Koblenz retreats a rook to survive. Tal activates his rook on the open file, tightening the noose. Koblenz tries to defend by moving a rook to a 7. Tal jumps with his knight into the center, threatening everything at once. Koblenz plays a brilliant defensive move, blocking lines and creating counterplay. Tal captures the knight with his pawn, keeping files open. Koblenz attacks with his bishop. Tal brings another knight forward, increasing threats. Koblenz captures a piece. Tal calmly develops his bishop, creating a deadly threat. Koblenz pushes a pawn to block checks and attack the bishop. Tal doubles rooks by lifting one rook behind the other. A quiet but deadly move. Koblenz retreats to defend desperately. Tal plays bishop to g5, a mistake. Koblenz captures a pawn to distract Tal. Tal brings a rook deep into enemy territory, a brilliant sacrifice. Koblenz pushes a pawn. Tal recaptures the bishop. Koblenz pushes a passed pawn with check. Tal calmly steps his king aside, completely in control. Koblenz grabs material with the queen, hoping for counterplay. Tal sacrifices his rook with a check. Koblenz blocks with a rook. Tal captures a pawn with his queen, dominating the 7th rank. At this point, Koblenz resigns, because the checkmate is unstoppable.